Hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Fred Minnick Show. Folks, we have a very, very, very important episode this week. I talked to IMAJ. IMAJ is this wonderful country music singer, black country music singer, has incredible vocals, very, very talented. But more importantly than anything, is she has a message that we all need to sit down and listen to. So, not going to be any trivia question this week. There's not going to be really any kind of my normal banter. This is a very different interview because I feel like the world needs to hear these types of stories. And their full warning, there is no whiskey in this episode, so we don't actually taste any whiskey. IMAJ does not drink. And we met last year at Hometown Rising. Now that interview is also on YouTube. You can see our first interview. It is on YouTube right now as well. So without further ado, please enjoy this interview with IMAJ. And afterward, check out her video. But first, a word from our sponsors.
The Fred Minnick Show is brought to you by the San Francisco World Spirits Competition. Visit sfspiritscomp.com for more information on our double gold and best in show winners. That's sfspiritscomp.com.
At Michter's Distillery, our passion is making the finest bourbon, rye, and American whiskey possible. When you only produce very small batch and single barrel whiskey as we do, each and every barrel has to be perfect. No detail is too small for our production team. From careful attention to the 18-month or more air-dried wood used in the construction of our barrels, to entering our distillate into the barrel at the costlier lower barrel entry proof of 103 so that it's smoother, to heat cycling our barrel houses, to our signature filtration protocol, we spare no expense in pursuing our goal of making the greatest American whiskey. And no Michter's gets bottled until our master distiller, Dan McKee, and our master of maturation, Andrea Wilson, say it's just right. Michter's Fort Nelson Distillery in downtown Louisville, Kentucky is open for tours and tastings. Book your visit on our website and stop by the bar at Fort Nelson for a world-class cocktail. For more information, follow us on social media at Michter's Whiskey, go to Michters.com, or visit your favorite bartender. Michter's Distillery. It's all about the whiskey.
Imagine this, an experience centered around 5 Kentucky Bourbon Trail craft tour distilleries in northern Kentucky, the gateway to Kentucky bourbon. Add 5 amazing bourbon-centric bars and 5 delicious bourbon-focused restaurants, cultivating the freshest takes and culinary delights, and you are on the beeline. Start your trip today at findyoursippingpoint.com.
I look at you as someone who very well expresses your emotions in your music. And I just want to kind of get a feel from you, like, how do you do that? Like, how are you able to, communicate something that is a vastly emotional subject matter and do it in a way that's peaceful and loving? Like, what's your process to get there?
Well, it's kind of difficult, I guess, to put into words unless I'm actually sitting down and in the zone, because you kind of get in this space that makes you sort of disassociate from yourself, and you end up walking in someone else's moccasins, if you will. And so, yeah, I guess it's just tapping into something that's universal within all of us, that I think a lot of us are afraid to tap into those things because of, it's a vulnerable situation, being an artist in the first place and being a human being in the first place, to be able to express emotions. But it's just kind of something that you tap into, and you just have to remember that there is strength in vulnerability, and other people being able to see certain emotions come out of you can be really beneficial, I think, to the world. For example, that 8-minute 46-second video that I just put out not too long ago for the George Floyd situation. And I think that's one of the videos we're probably going to show, right?
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. So for example, with that, which is more of an extreme example, because obviously I don't do that all the time, but with that, I wanted to write a song to put out something that could kind of tap into what everyone was feeling and kind of give them a sense of solidarity is
Mm-hmm.
only really the word I know how to, the word that I have for it, but nothing really came to mind except to put you there in the moment with what happened. And so all came with I Can't Breathe for 8 minutes and 46 seconds. And that's what came out of it. All of those emotions came out of it. And, you know, just with sometimes with music alone, that's all you need to connect with other people. Because a lot of times words don't help because people are on two different sides of the spectrum. And sometimes it just takes that music that touches the spirit or goes to something deeper within all of us to really connect us.
You know, you've been singing about, you know, some of these things in a genre, you know, that doesn't necessarily always want to hear that.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. What do you, when you go back and listen to that song, what does it, what does it make you think now? Does your opinion of a song change after you go back and listen to it?
Yeah, sometimes it does. A lot of times people listen to that song and they kind of hear what they want to hear, which is to be colorblind, but
Mm-hmm.
it's actually not about being colorblind. That was like a way into getting people who use the term colorblind in a way that is wanting to connect with people who are different from themselves, to kind of draw them in to understand uh, the beauty of color and that we all do see color. We actually do see color. People say I'm colorblind because they don't want to see the stereotypes associated with different people. That's what the term is generally used for.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, but the whole point of colorblind is to say that I do see color. I just see beyond the stereotypes of color. I see the beauty and diversity and everything else about human beings. And it still stands true today. So,
Yeah. Now I guess let's talk a little bit. You know, a little bit about the, you know, state of country music and, and, you know, the movement of diversity and putting a spotlight on things like Confederate monuments and the Confederate flag. You
right.
know, what's your feel, what's your take about how country music has handled, you know, this national movement?
I've seen quite a few people come out in support of um, of the movement, which I think is awesome. Uh, it's interesting. People like Lady Annabelle, bands like Lady Annabella changed their name to Lady A. You know, you have different country artists coming out that say, "Yeah, I did experience racism," and you know it's not correct. And there have been panels with other Black country singers talking about the adversity that they faced that they've never really been able to talk about because no one really wants to talk about it. It makes you uncomfortable, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And which is why I put it in my songs all the time because it needs to be talked about. It's something that's kind of swept under the rug, and you sweep enough dust under the rug and you have a hill. I mean, you
Mm-hmm.
can't walk on it anymore. So I think the response has been great. Of course, there's a lot more to do because we've been dealing with this forever. You
Yeah.
know, my parents dealt with it, my grandparents dealt with it to more extreme and more extreme degrees. You know, and I hope as time goes on that we can continue to make progress to understand each other and to want to understand where we're all coming from. that's important too, because a lot of times people, they don't want to hear it. They just want to stick by whatever they have to say, and not having, again, walked in someone else's moccasins, you can't really have an opinion unless it's a well-informed one, I believe. Because when you come out and you talk when you come out and you give your own opinion without having gotten the information of someone else's experience, then it becomes ignorance. So,
Yeah.
but I think they've done great so
Do
far.
you, so you think country music is taking the right steps?
Certain bands and things like that, yeah. I have to dig deeper into what everyone's doing. I haven't really done that yet, but I've seen quite a few people come out in support of what people are going through, and saying, yes, your feelings are valid, which is important.
I feel like real change is coming. And when you have, like NASCAR panning the Confederate flag, which
Right.
I didn't have that on my bingo card.
That was huge. That came as a surprise to me as well. And I didn't realize it was Bubba Wallace who started that. So they said, yeah, you're correct. You're valid. This is what we're going to do. So that was awesome.
So, when I'm having these conversations, with some people, they don't want to hear that. They just want to go into kind of like a defense mode. And I've tried to encourage people just to listen and not go into a defensive posture. And
Right.
that doesn't always work out. So what I've been doing now lately, I've been telling them to go listen to your music.
Well, I appreciate that.
But
people have to ask themselves, why are they defensive though?
Yeah.
Why is something like the Confederate flag so important to you when it existed for 5 years?
It existed for 5 years. It belonged to a group of people who, basically did not want to free slaves, and they lost. They lost the war. But
it was against the USA.
Yeah.
A country that we currently live in, America.
What I find interesting is that, in other countries where you have civil wars or like a lost government like the Nazis in Germany, you don't see those flags flown. You don't see those statues, so it's just interesting that
That's what I was just thinking.
It's weird.
Right. You don't see Hitler and his cronies erected as statues anywhere.
Right. And I know that people don't necessarily always want to hear this, but again, we need to talk about it,
Yeah, I mean, and it's adversity, racism, and all of that. That's something that Black people experience constantly. It's not like a once every blue moon situation. And for those statues and of slave owners and people who are against human rights to still be up, it doesn't make any sense. And a lot of times I found that people who want them up never really cared about them until somebody said tear them down.
Yeah.
So
That's
you have
true.
to ask yourself that question. Why do you care now that people who don't want them up are tearing them down? You never cared in the first place. And in Germany, of course, you have the situation with the concentration camps and Auschwitz and all of that, but those are museums, and they're set up to be seen as educational experiences, not to be looked up to.
Mm-hmm.
Or in a park for people to look at it and say, oh, this is a great person, when really they were horrible humans, violating human rights and raping and pillaging and everything else. Why would that be up?
I think that's exactly right. I think there's a difference between remembering what happened and celebrating the people who persecuted others, and
Yeah.
and so there's definitely a line that should be drawn there. We should not forget our history. If we forget our history, we will repeat it. And having Confederate monument is not necessarily remembering it. It's in a way
It's
celebrating
glorious.
it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but I'm glad with a lot of the wonderful things that people are doing, um, both to push the movement along and to be allied with the movement. And a lot of people are open to learning new things, and we're all learning new things about ourselves, which is amazing, because you grow old if you the first you become old if you don't continue to learn.
Mm-hmm.
And I think a lot of us are starting to learn more and more.
Imagine, all the moments that video wasn't there to capture it, and that is, to me, is the awakening moment for the world. It's like when we listen to people about what is going on and what has been going on, our eyes are opened. And yeah.
Right. And another thing is, did your mom ever have to have a talk with you about what to do in a situation when a cop comes? A lot of 99% of Black boys have to have a talk with their mother. They say, look, keep your hands this way and that way, and make sure you're paying attention. Say yes, sir, no, sir. There's certain talks that you have with your son in order to ensure that he comes home alive.
Wow.
Yeah, and that's something that's just normal in the Black community, but you don't see that in other communities. And I feel like you shouldn't even have to say, I know some great police officers. I feel like if something is messed up, if your computer is messed up, you go in and you get it fixed. If something's wrong with the system, you just fix it. You would imagine, but but I wish it was that simple.
When in the military, we had a thing called the UCMJ, the Uniform Code of Military Justice, and that was over everybody. You screwed up in any way, you got Article 15, you got a UCMJ. There's the watchdog over you in the military is intense, and things do happen, but people get punished. The police forces, they're all very different. Every city is different, and they all have different, restrictions and unions in there. But, I live in Louisville, and our police force has been pretty, pretty much in the national news a lot because of the actions of a few.
Yeah.
And sometimes that system is protected, and the good cops, unfortunately, are getting lumped into the bad cops because of a broken system.
Well, and that's the thing too, when you talk about the military and how someone's, overseeing someone else, you would imagine that in the police force, you'd be encouraged to hold your brother accountable, hold your sister accountable, and it just makes you a better cop. But like you said, sometimes certain situations are protected so that you don't get in trouble, but that just makes things worse.
Yeah,
So,
and there's also like this definitely was not the area I thought we would be talking about, but we'll go with it. There's also the situation of, like, when we look at all of our public servants, our teachers, our firefighters, across the board, I don't feel like we pay them enough. And if
I knew that was coming.
and if we pay teachers better, then we have a better society, in my opinion. I think it really starts with education everywhere.
Because I mean, teachers are buying their students school supplies.
Yeah.
Teachers constantly dip into their already low paychecks to help run the classroom, and that's not cool. That's wrong, in my opinion. So that needs to be handled. And then the other thing is the mental illness aspect. You know, I have a mentally ill, disabled brother, and my mom is terrified that something is going to happen to him, because anytime he has a break, you know, it's like, what do I do? Because if I call the police, he could die tonight. You know, training needs to be changed as well. I mean, I live in a city that has, or that's been working on training with the police officers in mental health, but it would be awesome if that was started everywhere. Because a lot of times, most of the times, you don't really need to use violence. It doesn't have to come to that, you know.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's another scary thought that you kind of live with. So that's kind of a double thing: mental illness and being, you know, a Black man. And I was talking to a friend the other day, and there was kind of an admission that something about Black men are inherently scary, and I don't know what it is. Why is my skin seen as a threat? Why is it weaponized? And who started that?
Wow.
Where does that come from? You know, it doesn't make any sense, and people don't want to admit it. But I mean, I think people know how they feel, but a lot of times they deny it. But a lot of times Black men are seen as a threat just by the color of their skin and the way that they look.
Yeah, that's wrong. That's wrong.
Yeah.
And it's
It's deeply rooted, unfortunately.
you know, and like, how do we get to that? How do we get past that? You know, I feel like sports is a great equalizer. Music is a great equalizer. You know, in my world, whiskey, which last time we talked, you told me you didn't drink whiskey, but
no, I don't do drugs or alcohol.
you're like a saint, you know, like
No.
I'm the vice, and you know, you're like perfect.
Not to say that, I mean, everybody has their thing.
That is true.
Which is fine. I think everyone should be able to have their thing. If you're not hurting someone and you're just enjoying your life, let's say we have one life to live. If we do, let everybody enjoy it the way they want to. You know.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. But like I just think of like all the things that, you know, could bring us together and help our society right now. We can't do a lot of it because of the virus, and you know, but also by the virus not allowing us to get together and actually focus on the situation. You know, that might be bringing it out a little bit more into the open. So our country has a history of like trying to move on of something, like they don't want to focus too much on it. 9/11 happens and we have 0% car deals to get the economy going, if that's an example. And you know, we have to focus on the issues right now because there's nothing to distract us. And that's almost a positive. But coming out of this, well, how do we get better as a society about loving one another?
Right. How do you get better? I think number one is education. I would imagine. You have to be able to look at yourself first and what you're doing. Even if you think you're the most non-racist person in the world and you've never been racist or prejudiced against someone else, you still have to kind of reflect on who you are and what you've done in your life, and whether or not you stopped others and spoken up for others. I actually wrote a post about it, on how racism is not kept alive by racist people. Racism is kept alive by people who are indifferent, who just allow them to, they're allowed to exist. Now, if everyone was completely intolerant of racism, racists at every level, then they would become like a pariah and they would disappear, they'd become obsolete. But because people allow them to exist, they exist. So good people who want everyone to come together and want all this to be fixed need to speak up whenever something happens, especially within their family and friends, because that's really the most difficult time to speak up, because you don't want to have conflict with those that you love. But that's when you need to do it most.
Yeah, and it's hard, it's hard because, a lot of people have that family member they just know they can't get through to. And so they're just like, give up. And I'm not just saying this to kind of stroke your ego, but that's why, like, in the background, if you got that family member, just put your iPad or your iTunes or however you listen to your music, just put on a little bit of IMAJ. Maybe some of your music will just kind of like sneak in there and change how they think a little bit.
Put on some Guess Who's Coming to Dinner.
I mean, you do so. Maybe you got some subliminal action in there. You could, change some folks' opinions on things.
Yeah. So you have to speak up. You have to be courageous, because it's like, for example, as an artist, people always ask me, how in the world do you go on stage in front of thousands of people and aren't you scared? Are you scared? Of course I'm terrified before I go on stage. I'm always terrified before I go on stage, but that doesn't mean I'm not going to do it. I'm going to do it regardless of how I feel. You just kind of walk through the fire, because what's on the other side is so magical and beautiful. And so that's the same thing we have to do with fixing this whole situation with institutionalized racism and fighting and everything else, is you have to walk through that fear to talk to those closest to you.
Yeah.
And to reflect on yourself, first and foremost. Reflect on yourself and educate yourself. I mean, there are certain films that you can watch, like 13th, which is a great documentary.
Yeah, that's all free on YouTube right now, actually.
Right. So. That one. And there's another one that I really love. Oh goodness, what is it called? There was a film put out in the 1900s that was it was a really racist film about the KKK and all that, but the title was used for a film that came out in 2018 that teaches you about slavery and what happened and that sort of thing. Great film. But there's a lot of, amazing films out there. The Hate U Give, I think, is another one. Mm-hmm. So for people who don't like to read, which I really encourage you to read anyway, but if you don't like to read, there's a bunch of films out there that can kind of awaken your senses to what other people are going through. There's a book that was written by Dr. Joy about post-traumatic slave syndrome. I was lucky enough to see her live, and she spoke on it in Miami at the Art Therapists Association of America. I was speaking that day as well, but she was the keynote speaker. And she talks about how slavery is something that, because it went on for so long, is now encoded into our DNA, where we're having PTSD.
And there's actual, for anyone who wants to dispute that, there was a lot of studies on survivors of the Holocaust and how their family members reacted. and they discovered that grandchildren who did not even know their grandparents or knew their grandparents were in the Holocaust, that they had PTSD from the Holocaust. So that
Right.
that is absolutely 1000% true. So
Right. Right.
um,
And that went on for a shorter period of time than slavery did. So imagine 400 years of that.
exactly.
It's deeply, deeply rooted in everything. And I mean, you think about the breeding and everything else, and there's a reason I look the way I look and the way my father looks and everything else. All that is kind of tied into and encoded into the DNA. And so I would encourage you to look up Dr. Joy and post-traumatic slave syndrome. But there's so much information out there if you genuinely want racism to end. There's so much information out there. And of course, I encourage people to talk to their friends and ask them about their experiences and what they went through. Of course, we're all different, but there's something that kind of ties us all together. I've had
Yeah.
quite a few experiences. A lot of times when I've had experiences, it's been with my brothers, because they have the afros and the darker skin. And so, yeah, I just encourage people to educate themselves and to be open to doing so if you genuinely want change and world peace, which I would love for us to have someday.
Right.
So
I'm curious, do your brothers have any musical talents? Do they have the gift that you have?
I don't really talk about them much, but I have a brother who does a lot of video and photography for me. And
Oh, I met him. Yeah, I met him.
and
My
he's
hometown.
huge. He's 6'5"
Yeah.
giant. But the giants are always gentle giants. So, but he modeled. That's about it. So.
Well, you are definitely a talent. What's new in the music world? Are you working on any new songs or albums right now?
I'm working on some new music, yes. Of course, with the COVID-19 situation, everything has been delayed or canceled.
Yeah.
So a lot of us, most artists right now are navigating through that and trying to figure out how to keep their message relevant during this time while we're not able to kind of have huge concerts and things like that. The way I do that is by making posts about peace and love and speaking on things like this, and TikToks, of course.
I still haven't figured out TikTok. I mean,
TikTok is so fun. Don't sleep on it.
I've tried to do the dancing, and I don't know. There's just so many things you got to do right now and I have to choose my battles. I can't. If you're good at TikTok, my buddy Kenny's really good at TikTok. He'll be pouring bourbons and like dancing to it, and it's like he looks like a radio DJ, like on,
That's awesome. And you don't always have to dance. I mean, like that's like the number one thing. But you have country artists like myself making music and also delving into different things like acting and comedy and all that other stuff. But yeah, I have a few shows that I'm getting together for later in the year and for 2021, but for the most part, everything's been kind of delayed. So I've had a lot of time. I've had the privilege to have a lot of time to write songs and that sort of thing. So.
Well, you're the sky's the limit for you. I just think the world of your music and your thoughtfulness. I think your message was on point today, and I think you have your music. This is my opinion, and I hope that people will listen to me on this. But I feel like your music can help convey the answers that a lot of people are looking for right now. You have your music communicates. It communicates the message, and I know people need to hear that message.
Thank you so much. That means a lot, Fred.
Well, IMAJ, thank you so much for coming on. I know this won't be the first time. Um, I'm confident that one day, you'll be, I know you opened at Hometown Rising, but one day you'll be doing the night show, the night talk shows, and all that. So you are a star for sure on the rise.
Thank you, Fred. I appreciate you.
All right, IMAJ, be safe. Cheers.
Okay, you too.
I hope you enjoyed, or at least learned something from that interview with IMAJ. And I believe that if we just listen, if we listen and we stop, people stop trying to be defensive about every single thing, and we listen and we try to have a moment of change. Like, I feel like we can get past this and have true equality. But we need to listen, and people need to take this seriously and not just want to move on to the next thing. We need to really focus on it and fix it. We'll end with IMAJ's video remembering George Floyd.
Breathe. I can't 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 breathe. I help me. I can't breathe. Oh. Please don't kill me. Please don't kill me. Mama, 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 I can't breathe. I can't breathe. Mama, I can't breathe. Mama, it hurts. Everything hurts. My back hurts. My neck hurts. Mama, they're gonna kill me. Mama, I can't breathe. Mama, I can't breathe. Mama, I'm through.